What is it that drives people to be brave, to commit acts of heroism, often in the face of the enemy? I'm Darren Coventry, former soldier and now video and podcast producer at BFBS. I've been talking to men and women who've received the UK's highest military honours. We talk about what happened, what they thought at the time, and how they feel about it now. This is Tea and Medals. Before we launch season 2, Tea and Medals producer Gisela wants to ask me a few questions.
I've always wanted to say this. Former soldier, Darren Coventry, how do you take your brew?
White one.
And we're not going to mention the nickname for that.
There isn't a nickname for that.
I thought there was.
A white one? No.
Oh. All the nicknames you've given me for the different ways of having a cup of tea, and yours doesn't have...
So a NATO standard was white too, but I don't think...
Was it NATO substandard?
Maybe. White one.
So this time you don't get to ask the questions. I do. How do you feel about that?
It is quite nerve-wracking. Let's see what we've got.
Yeah, so as your producer, I thought it might be quite fun to find out a little bit more about your military experience, reflect on Series 1 and throw ahead a little bit to Series 2. You up for that?
Yep, obviously Series 2 is coming soon, so let's kick it off with a...
And are you going to drink your tea? Are you going to be the first person?
I always drink my tea.
To finish your tea.
Do
you always finish yours?
I always finish mine.
Okay. Well, I'll have to try and finish mine, won't I?
I could try. I'll be the first guest, to finish the tea.
Okay. So let's start by talking about your career in the army. When did you join up and why did you join up?
So I joined in 1994. I don't really know why I joined. It hadn't been in my long-term aspirations. I joined the Army Cadets, and I guess that's where the interest came from. And I was always very technical. I wanted to be an engineer. That was the kind of route I was going down. Had thought about joining as an officer, and then realised I didn't really want to have the full kind of academic route. So I switched, joined as a soldier, joined the REME, and then in basic training, my instructor was a guy called Nick Summerhays, who was a bit of a character. He was a military police corporal then. He went on to be the core RSM of the military police. So he didn't change for a single day between being corporal and the core RSM. And I thought, actually, it's one of the things I had thought about, but had gone down the REME route. And I just decided then I wanted to change and become military police. And I asked him. He used to have a big bushy moustache, and he was like, "You want to join my corps?" Oh my God! And I was like, "Yes, corporal." And
Did he give you a choice?
Eventually, he made it happen, and I transferred and joined the military police.
And then from Royal Military Police to video producer, tell us a little bit how that happened.
So that, I guess, is not the normal route, but I always had a creative something going on. I liked art. I liked making little holiday videos. I liked to take photos, and I was starting to take some of it a little bit more seriously. So there was always, just completely away from work, that was always going on in the background. There was always something that I liked to do that was a little bit creative. And then the Media Academy at BFBS just happened to start a year before the end of my military career. So timing-wise, actually, when it came down to the months, timing-wise, it became perfect. I left the military in June at the end of my 24-year career and started studying full-time at the BFBS Academy in October. So, everything kind of aligned. And I ended up with a place at the BFBS Academy, learning all about the different creative aspects. It wasn't just about video, but I focused on video. And was very fortunate at the end of that year of study to be offered a job and come on to the BFBS creative video team.
And what's it like working with a load of civvies?
BFBS hasn't got normal civvies. they're
I'm a normal civvy.
But the people that have been around BFBS, especially for a long time, such as you've been immersed in the military world, so you're a kind of grey area in between. And obviously, as you know, without the wider company, we have people deployed, we have people who've been on operations, we've had people in every corner of the globe and still do. So I don't think there's many 100% civvies in BFBS, but it's great to work with such a broad range of people, and especially our video team. We've got a real broad range of people in such a small team, and yeah, it's great to work with them and learn from them. And they're a young team who are bringing lots of new, fresh ideas to. I'm a bit of a dinosaur, maybe, not in technology wise, but I'm definitely been around a while, so it's good to get those fresh opinions from people like Precious on camera 3.
And Amy on
and
camera.
Amy on camera 1. She's not that young though.
Oof. Right. So now you're a podcast host for Tea and Medals. So we started planning this idea for the Tea and Medals podcast before you were involved, and we were looking for a host. And somebody suggested you because we wanted somebody who could talk the talk with military people, who'd been there, who'd done that. But I had no idea what you'd be like. So I was a little bit nervous of you.
So was I.
You doing it. But then we realised you can talk the hind legs off a donkey.
So I never aspired to be in front of the camera or in audio voicing anything. And actually, it was my worst nightmare. And when I was asked to do it, it was a big, moment for me. Was like, you've got to jump in the deep end. You can't be half-hearted. Got to get into it. Talking I can do. I spent lots of years interviewing soldiers for naughty things, but obviously that gives me experience in interviewing, and I hope that in some way transpires into getting stuff out of people. Yeah, so I had to just jump in the deep end.
But you do it really well because you do it. You haven't got that journalist background, but you just want to know, and that's the main thing.
And the reason that I really wanted to be part of this was because I know how many stories are out there that don't get told outside of their immediate circles. Some of the people that we have spoken to are really well known in their peer group. Everyone knows in the battalions who's got a military cross or even something at one of the higher awards. Everyone knows, but outside of their peer group, those stories aren't really that well known.
Some of them make the papers, or some of them become headlines, and then others don't.
I guess if there's something unusual about it, or a high award, or we spoke to Michelle Goodman, with the first woman to ever be awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions in Iraq. They make the papers, and they become, I guess, a bit more widely known and widely famous. And then, we've got the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross. There aren't many of those around. I think there's less than 30 ever been awarded. The Victoria Cross, we haven't been able to get a recipient for the show because there's so few of them alive. But they're actually, because they've been around for a lot longer time, there's more than 2,000 Victoria Crosses being awarded. So they're actually much more common than medals like the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross. So those stories are known, but those military crosses and the Distinguished Flying Crosses, which aren't as well publicised, and actually might be publicised at the time, but then the stories just kind of die off. That's what I wanted to tell. There must be a way that we can tell the stories that don't get the recognition that they necessarily deserve. And I would love to be able to tell some of those stories, some of those real, in the military and the army anyway, they're called DITs. And every unit, every subunit have got DITs that people talk about and stuff. And they didn't get recognition for what they did, but everyone knows that that's a whole very complicated thing about who gets recognised and who doesn't, and who gets what award and who doesn't. But the stories are still there, and it'd be great to be able to tell as many as we can. Just share those stories that are very inspiring, and the recipients themselves, as you've realised, they're all so humble. and they don't want to take ownership generally for the actions they did. They see it as they were just part of a team or just doing their job, or and actually, when you look at it from the outside, you can see that they individually did do something extra that wasn't just part of the team. It wasn't just doing their job. There was more to it, and that's why they were recognised. But there's so many of those stories, and it'd be great to tell them.
So the first story that you brought to our attention, and it was our first episode, I don't think we would have found it if it hadn't been for you, because it doesn't appear. You Google the story and it's not there anywhere. It's in a book, but that you'd read. And the interesting part, and the reason it's stuck in your mind, because this is the episode with Chris Barmforth MC, because you were there, Darren. Do you want to explain a little bit more? It's in the episode, but...
So I was reading this book. It's called In Foreign Fields, and it was just a short collection of stories about people who'd been awarded medals. And I was reading this book, and I was like, this sounds familiar. And it's just about an incident in Basra. It's quite the early days, post the kind of invasion of Iraq in the Second Gulf War. Quite early days into the kind of, the British tour. So it was Telic 3. And I was attached for a certain amount of time to the Queen's Royal Hussars. And anyway, I was reading this book, and this guy from the Queen's Royal Hussars had got an MC, and I was reading this story, and I was like, no, I was in that ambush. And I didn't know that this guy Barney had gone on to be awarded the Military Cross, because I wasn't part of their unit. I was a military policeman attached to go and do a specific training mission for about 6 weeks. And I was still kind of in touch with one of the guys from that tour. So when this project came up, I think I was working on something different, and I asked someone about it, and he said, oh, Barney's still around, and there's a young guy called Pikey, who we spoke to as well. They're still around. They've all left the military, but they're still in touch with people. So I reached out to various different people, and we got in touch with Barney, Pikey, Kingy. Trevor was the person who I'd worked with the most. He was still serving down at Bovington. Got in touch with the old commanding officer, Major Kokup. He was Major Kokup then. And yeah, that all came together. And that was really, for me, almost 20 years after that incident of being in that ambush, to just catch up with. I hadn't seen Pikey since, we lifted him onto a helicopter, and he'd been casevaced out, quite seriously wounded at the time. And I hadn't seen him or heard from him, because we just don't work that way. We, as harsh as it sounds, those incidents happen, and then you just move on to the next job, the next incident in some cases. Yeah, so it was great to catch up, and I think it made a really good first episode, mostly because of the characters.
I love that episode.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be funny.
No, but
it is funny.
That's how it is. And actually what people won't know is that whilst we were setting up, those three guys were sat in the bar, weren't they?
Yes.
And that becomes a bit like, now you know that, you watch that again with a different...
I think they'd had a couple of beers, hadn't they?
They'd had a few beers. But yeah, such, great bits is what, they were telling. And they could have gone on all day. And actually, there's probably a lot of people haven't seen from some of those episodes.
One of our producers has spoken to Chris, and he did a radio interview on BFBS Radio to talk about how he felt about the episode, didn't he? And he felt like he got some closure from it, that it kind of sorted everything out in his head.
Yeah, and actually I stayed in touch with Chris for quite a while, and not just that, Chris was really chuffed that we'd spoken to Pikey and Kingy, because they'd never had their stories told. He was the one who got the recognition from that incident, and he thought it gave them an opportunity to tell their story and also give us some closure. And young Pikey actually got a Queen's Commendation for bravery, so he was recognised. He was badly injured, but his actions in driving during the initial ambush probably saved everyone in that vehicle, because he took some evasive actions and got people out of the immediate killing area, even though he was badly injured. And he was also recognised. So in some way, we got to tell his story.
So you didn't get recognised for keeping an eye on the backpacker?
No, the backpacker, we did mention it in the episode. The backpacker
Because you looked after him especially, didn't you?
Yeah, so I stood on the backpacker's head. I put him in the well of the which
Is that allowed?
I don't know. It was for his safety. I basically put him in the well of the snatch and stood on him to keep him down there, whilst it was machine gun fire. I didn't know that there was RPGs winging around, and I don't know if RPG hit our vehicle, but lots of machine gun fire, and that sounds like being inside a metal box with ding ding ding. It sounds exactly as you would think it is, but there's a lot, and we've got guys out the top trying to put fire down that way, but there was so much incoming fire that they had to drop down for a few seconds. So the safest place for the backpacker was on the floor
under your
in the
foot.
well. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about Series 1. What have been your favourite Tia Medals moments so far? Is there anything that really stands out for you?
I think every story is so unique, and I've got a general interest in military history, not like to study it, but I do, like to read about the wider military. And as a teenager, I read about the Falklands and Northern Ireland in particular. So hearing these stories from those eras it blows my mind away that I'm sitting talking to these people who've done the stuff that you read about in books and see in movies. I guess the episode with Keith Mills really was one of those like wow moments, because the Falklands War for the British Army is one of the only times they've acted completely independently in recent kind of history. So there wasn't anyone else to come to it was just the British, and those stories and images are very, very well known. But that story in particular wasn't well known to me, that Keith and his team of Royal Marines had their own little skirmish battle, whatever it is, on South Georgia. Just to listen to those guys, Bob Ashton, the machine gunner.
It was like it happened, because I was sitting in on that. It was like it happened yesterday.
Yeah, they could spin a dit. They both just added so much colour to that story. And yet, when you boil it down, very serious incident. Lots of people could have died. Lots of really tense moments of, we're saying about having to convince his own soldiers that they were going to, surrender. And the word surrender being very contentious, getting up and walking out there, all that kind of stuff. It was just like, and then still being quite brave in front of the Argentinians of like, you really need to all kind of calm down, because otherwise, lots of people have got fingers on triggers on both sides here. So we really need to kind of calm this down. Otherwise it's going to be a bloodbath potentially. So yeah, just to sit there and listen to that. Just like, whew. So I guess that's a real standout moment. But everyone is spoken to, Michelle was so feminine and quiet.
Yeah.
And yet she and all of her crew were like cold as ice. Yeah. And when she flew that helicopter. Yeah, so they all had those standout moments.
I had a little chat with her in the run-up to the interview, and she was quite stressed out about moving house. And I said, how can you be stressed out about moving house when you've landed a helicopter under fire in the middle of Basra at night? She said, I don't know. I just do. It's just normal. It's really fascinating how people have that in them, but they still have to deal with the stuff the rest of us deal with.
That's why I like to try and find these stories and tell them, because I've seen it 10 times more than will ever be recognised by awards. You just see people doing stuff that's like becomes the norm, but it isn't the norm. And I think a lot of people outside the military realise that the people in the military are doing a not normal job, but inside the military you just see it as normal. And there's so many different things that just go on, and people, like, you tell people at home or your mum and they're like, what? And people actually play it down a lot, and I've done that. You tell your family and at home how that you play it down, but in reality they're in the background.
Why do you play it down? Because you don't want to
you don't want them to worry. It's stuff that's outside of it's outside of your control, so there's no point them being worried about it. Literally on the phone in Afghanistan, phoning home, and there's bullets and explosions going off in the background, then you're like, oh, it's just a TV, mum, gotta go. and hang up without trying to worry them. But, you've got to move on.
So what have you learned?
I think I've learned that I thought everyone would be happy to tell their stories. And I think what we've learned is that people don't want to tell their stories necessarily. For a lot of people, actually for every incident, it was a traumatic incident. And we want them to tell their stories. But a lot of people don't want to revisit it. And I've spoken to so many people that we're never going to get on the podcast. We're never going to get them because they just don't want to revisit that incident. And when they explain it to you in that way, it's like, oh, of course you don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's what I've learned is that these stories are, in some way remarkable, but in other ways, something really bad has happened for that to happen. And to an outsider or to someone who wasn't there, not everyone wants to tell that story or revisit it.
It's like you just said, the stuff you keep from your family. And if you're going to sit down in these chairs and tell those stories and your mum's watching, how do you feel about that sort of thing?
Yeah. And actually, I think I would now look at everyone who has any kind of extra award for gallantry or bravery and see that so much more, that not everyone wants to tell you why they got it or what the circumstances were. And sometimes I've also learned that there's not always one incident that necessarily gets you a military cross. Sometimes it's just a whole collection of things that happen that there's no one standout incident. And that's what I've learned. That's
why we haven't really done the Navy, isn't it? Because the Navy medals are often for lots of things.
They're for more kind of battles rather than...
but we would like to hear from the Navy.
Yeah, and the Navy have got so many great stories to tell in a completely different... They're so different from the Army. And obviously my experiences with the Army. Hopefully we'll get somebody sometime.
Let's talk about the new series, which is quite exciting. We've done some interviews already. Do you want to just give a little overview? So the first one we've done really is John Thompson.
Yeah, so John Thompson from the Royal Marines, the highest decorated serving Royal Marine. He's left now, but he is holder of the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross and a mentioned dispatches, both for completely separate incidents. And I guess mine and Tomo's careers were pretty similar in times, a little bit offset, but we've been through all the same places, so we were able to have those chats, about Afghanistan, Iraq. I can talk because I've been there.
You both could. I've got to edit it. It's so long.
And it might be worth saying that I was a military policeman, and sometimes that involved driving around in a police car and locking up soldiers who've been naughty. But for me in particular, most of my career was at the front end of the military police, attached to the infantry. So 2 years in Northern Ireland in Crossmaglen, attached to the infantry. All of the way through Iraq and Afghanistan tours was normally not in a policing role. I'm with the infantry as it's called close support. So I'm there to deal with stuff like prisoners that get taken, the unfortunate times when casualties are taken and evidence needs to be gathered, and that's British casualties generally. Not necessarily to investigate when soldiers shoot enemy combatants, but sometimes to be there to be a voice of reason to help the commanding officer investigate that. They investigate that in what's called shooting incident reviews, and it's not a military police function to investigate that unless there's a crime. But it's always to advise the commanding officer on, this is a shooting incident review, you can deal with this. There's no immediate crime apparent. So always attached to the infantry, pretty much. From almost all of my operational career was attached to some infantry unit or another.
And the other one we've done is Colonel Richard Wesley.
Yeah, and that's another story that's just needs to be told more. And again, it probably was very well known at the time, and his involvement was in early on in the Bosnian War, the Yugoslav War, and His part of it was in a small town called Gorazda, and everyone who knows about military history will know about the massacre at Srebrenica, which happened a few weeks later. But that massacre could have happened at Gorazda, and thousands of Bosnian Muslim civilians and soldiers could have been massacred in the same way if Major Richard Wesley's Royal Welsh Fusiliers hadn't basically just, helped to stave it off in the way that they did. And and another story that's just like, how does everyone not know about this?
Bosnia's a bit forgotten about, I always think.
Yeah, I think because it had been overshadowed by, it quickly rolled from Bosnia into a number of other conflicts. So you had the Kosovo deployments. Actually, there was stuff in Macedonia. There was all that kind of breakup of the former Yugoslavia. But then very quickly came along the Gulf Wars and Op Fingal and then Op Herrick in Afghanistan. And those wars were completely different, big multinational ground defensive type stuff at the outset. So I guess, it just was overshadowed.
I've got one more question for you. Have you got any medals, Darren?
I've got some medals, but I haven't got any medals or awards for gallantry, and that's why it's those stories. The medals I've got are just tour medals. I've got all of them, but it's the gallantry stories that are there. I was just lucky or unlucky in my career. I know people who've joined up and did a full career with a Northern Ireland medal. That's all there was at the time, or the General Service Medal, Northern Ireland. And I was just happened to join at the time when it got busy. and I remember sitting at my first regimental dinner as a kind of corporal with like 5, and my RSM had 1. That's probably reversed now. It's gone the other way around. So the RSM's probably got 9 or 10, and the soldiers who join now might have none or 1, because there isn't the amount of operations going on. There's stuff going on, but only certain deployments and missions are recognised with the award of operational medals, and there's few of them out there. So you've probably got sergeants in the units now that might have just caught the end of an Afghan tour, but then there might be some who just completely missed it, and that's why it's unlucky or lucky. I don't know what the answer is. It's, for me, I felt lucky. I enjoyed deploying overseas. I think that's what people join to do, is to go and soldier. Not many people joined through that period who wanted to stay behind.
And is there somebody you'd like to interview that we haven't done, or a particular story you've got your eye on that?
I wish you'd aim me off for that one. Of course, we'd love to interview a Victoria Cross holder, and there aren't many out there. So Johnson Bihari is one, and I remember reading his book, and it'd be great to talk to him. And I don't think we'll get the others.
Have you finished your tea?
Almost, no. I didn't realise we were wrapping up.
So obviously I know how this is all put together, but do you want to explain how we make tea and medals?
Yeah, so as people know, there's a main interview, but we try and get some side interviews. And today we're in our studio at BFBS, but we also try and move this around if we need to. We can take it to other places. Show. It's a travelling show. So there's a main interview, and then we try and get some side interviews to add to the story. And generally, because people are so humble, to try and get that other view or perspective on it. And it worked really well in the Chris Bamforth episode, because we literally had people like positioned at different points during the ambush. So we literally got that different perspective. And then afterwards, it obviously gets edited into a more concise version. And then it goes out on YouTube. And what some people might not know is it's also a podcast. So it's also out there in just an audio format. So production-wise, that causes you some problems.
I'm very picky about the microphones.
Yeah. And actually, there's some more stuff in the podcast than there is in the YouTube version, because we have that more tea episode, which is kind of, extra bits in between. And actually we explore a lot more about the history of each of the individual medals, and talk about some examples of some recipients who don't appear on the show. So yeah, there's definitely more to it than just the sitting down talking bit, and people can listen on all the podcast platforms. So if they're on the move and can't watch, or they want to get that extra stuff and the more tea, then yeah, that's where they can get it.
And we've loved the comments, haven't we?
Well, you get the emails from all over the world, and any great emails also get a mug.
Yeah, we've had a few requests for the mugs.
Yeah, so you can get those if you comment or send in suggestions of people we need to speak to. And I've probably already tried to speak to them, because I've tried to speak to so many people.
Got an email from Darren.
Yeah.
You could be sitting in that chair.
With a mug. You get a mug.
And a tea. Or a coffee. So what's next for Tea and Medals?
So obviously Series 2 is in production. They've got some great stuff coming up. Follow us on social media. Subscribe on YouTube, BFBS Creative. And yeah, hopefully we've got some new stuff up our sleeve.
And you can email us at podcast@bfbs.com.
Yeah, you put that bit in the end, don't you? So,
yeah.
In your newscaster
audio
voice.
version. Yeah, that's me at the beginning with the warning.
Yeah.
The scary voice. Cool. Thank you, Darren.
No, thank you. It wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be.
What did you think it was going to be
I
like?
thought there was going to be some really hard
Really?
questions.
You think
about
I'd
it,
do
yeah.
that to you?
Yeah, I thought you'd been planning this for weeks.
No, I think that's it.
And
Next time we'll take questions from the viewers.
Yeah. There was no spitting your tea out.
No, I wanted Darren to
That's what
tell
you
me
didn't ask
something
me.
where I spit my tea out, but he didn't.
You didn't ask any of my stories.
Oh, come on then. Let's have some of your stories.
Turn the cameras on.